Ghost Town connects surprisingly well with A Course in Miracles because both explore isolation, avoidance, unfinished grievances, forgiveness, and the shift from self-protection toward joining. Bertram Pincus, played by Ricky Gervais, begins the film as a classic defended ego personality, intellectually sharp, emotionally closed, socially avoidant, misanthropic, self-contained. He prefers distance because closeness feels inconvenient and threatening. That's very ACIM. The ego often equates autonomy with safety. If I don't need anyone, I can't be hurt. So Bertram structures his life around minimal emotional entanglement. He works as a dentist, ironically dealing with people physically while avoiding intimacy psychologically. Then comes the near-death experience. After briefly dying, he suddenly sees ghosts everywhere. From an ACIM perspective, the ghosts symbolize unresolved mental content, unfinished attachments, grievances, regrets, unhealed relationships, lingering identifications. The dead are not at peace because they remain psychologically stuck. That's deeply aligned with ACIM's view that suffering is tied less to physical death than to attachment and misidentification within the mind. The ghosts are constantly trying to complete unfinished business because the ego believes salvation lies in fixing the past, and Bertram hates this immediately. Important. Awakening rarely feels convenient to the ego at first. Suddenly, he cannot maintain isolation so easily. Relationship intrudes everywhere. Needs, emotions, unfinished dynamics, all the things he avoided become unavoidable. ACIM often functions similarly. It disrupts the ego's carefully managed emotional distance. Frank Hurley, played by Greg Kinnear, becomes Bertram's primary ghost teacher. Frank is charismatic, manipulative, funny, insecure, and still deeply attached even after death. That's psychologically revealing. Physical death in the film does not automatically produce wisdom. ACIM would agree. The ego is a mental structure, not merely a bodily condition. One can carry attachment, vanity, jealousy, and control dynamics psychologically regardless of circumstance. Frank initially wants Bertram's help for selfish reasons, to interfere in his widow Gwen's future relationship. This resembles the ego's attempt to preserve possession beyond separation. The ego says, if I cannot have you, I still must control the narrative. But gradually, deeper truth emerges. Frank's real issue is unresolved guilt and dishonesty. That's ACIM territory. The ego hides guilt beneath blame, distraction, manipulation, or humor. Healing begins only when defensiveness softens enough for honesty. Then there's Gwen. Téa Leoni plays her with warmth and groundedness that contrasts Bertram's emotional sterility. Bertram initially relates to people transactionally or irritably because vulnerability feels unsafe. But through his encounters with both ghosts and Gwen, his isolation structure begins collapsing. That movement resembles ACIM's transition away from self-protective separation toward joining, not dependency, not romantic fantasy, actual participation in relationship. The ghosts themselves are fascinating through an ACIM lens because they externalize something psychologically true. People often live haunted by unresolved interpretations. Grievances linger, old identities linger, unspoken truths linger. ACIM repeatedly teaches that the past survives through present attachment. The ghosts cannot move on because they still believe resolution lies in controlling outcomes, fixing narratives, or preserving identity. Forgiveness becomes the release mechanism. Not, everything was fine, but I no longer need to carry this as identity. There's also a subtle ACIM point in Bertram's sarcasm. Humor itself is not the issue. AIM can actually align beautifully with playful humor. But Bertram's sarcasm initially functions defensively, keeping intimacy at arm's length. The ego often uses wit to avoid exposure. As the film progresses, his humor softens into warmth rather than detachment. That's a real shift. Then there's the central irony. Bertram becomes more alive by interacting with the dead. Very ACIM-like. The ego's version of life is often emotionally numb, defended, and disconnected. What revives Bertram is not comfort, but interruption. Relationship interrupts his isolation. Service interrupts self-absorption. Vulnerability interrupts control. And importantly, the film never turns him into a saint. He remains awkward, imperfect, somewhat cynical. That's psychologically honest. Healing in ACIM is usually less about becoming spiritually impressive and more about becoming less defended, more available, more transparent, less armored against love. And perhaps the deepest ACIM resonance in Ghost Town is this. Bertram thought peace meant not being bothered by anyone. But real peace began the moment he stopped organizing his life around avoidance.